89.9 KMOJ, the People Station. Today's R&B and throwbacks. It's Glam Life Kim, and today is it's actually 12:35 on Wednesday, April the 15th, and it is time for Minneapolis 360. I've got my favorite fella on the phone, Mr. Anthony Taylor with the City of Minneapolis. How are you today, Anthony?
I'm good, sis. How you doing today?
I am awesome. I can't complain. The sun is shining just a tad bit, so it's got me happy.
It always makes our day a little bit better when we can see the sun, and it's always good to hear your voice, even though I am not in the studio with you today.
I know. Same here.
Always thank you. Thank everyone from KMOJ. This is a special edition, Minneapolis. We are actually usually on at 1 o'clock, and we informed people last week that we'd be going on every week during this pandemic. But today we're going to be on from 12:30 to 1:30 today for our hour-long program, because there's so much information that changes on a daily basis. And also, we've got a special guest on as well for today's Minneapolis 360. But first, just to give you a little breakdown who I am. As you know, I am Anthony Taylor. I am the African American Community Specialist for the City of Minneapolis. This is Minneapolis 360, and I want to welcome everybody here today on the show, our first hour-long program. And just to give you a little update of what are we going to do today, we're always and continually be talking about COVID-19. I'll give you some updates on what's going on that affects our city. Also, too, we're going to talk a little bit about the Minneapolis Gap Funding Initiative that Mayor Fry set out last week for small business. Later in the show, I'll talk about the gap funding for housing to give you a little information on that. And then really, our special guest today will be Chief Arradondo, the Minneapolis Police Chief here in the city. He'll be joining us at 1 o'clock today, but the first half hour will be Tabitha Fischer, and she's a business development specialist from CPED. She's going to talk about the Minneapolis Gap Funding Initiative for small business in the first half hour. But as we go along, and you're welcome to please submit your questions to KMOJ's Facebook and KMOJ Radio to ask Chief Arradondo any questions that you feel are important about COVID-19. He's really going to break down a lot of information on the enforcement part of it, Minneapolis. But Tabitha Fischer will be on first, but let me just give you a little bit of update on where we're at here in Minneapolis regarding cases of COVID-19. As I told you last week, they're in all 50 states, so health officials still continue to confirm new cases. Those numbers will continue to rise. Right now, as of today, there are 1,809 COVID cases in the state of Minnesota. So people who have tested positive for COVID are 10%. Now, if you remember what I told Minneapolis last week, it was 7%. So it is now 10% of African Americans have been tested positive for COVID. So that's concerning, because just last week it's went up 3%. But there are 940 patients that are no longer reported to be isolated. Now, we talked about the governor's peacetime stay-at-home order. It had been extended through the 13th. So again, no schools are open, restaurant and bars aren't open. So the stay-in-order place continues. I just really also, too, and we can't talk about this enough, Minneapolis, that we have to talk about social distancing. Last week, I told everybody that it was really more about the physical distancing that's important. So staying 6 feet away from each other is the most important thing if you have to leave the house. Now, if you do have to leave for essential travel, again, remember, we're talking about the 6-foot distance from others when you're in public. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention says that the spread of COVID-19 is person to person. So keeping that 6-foot distance is important. So going to the grocery store, making trips to the gas station, making trips to the corner store, just make sure that you are practicing the physical distancing. Again, I know it's tough too, Minneapolis, because you might want to bring some of your kids or your loved ones to take that walk with you, but really big groups aren't advised in this situation. Always remember to wash your hands as often as possible. So the main thing I want to make sure, too, is that if you have symptoms, right, so respiratory illness are some of the symptoms of fever, cough, shortness of breath. Some symptoms include headaches and sore throats and diarrhea. So again, if you are feeling some of those symptoms, please go and get yourself checked out. Go to the doctor. The best way, and again, I always want to stress this, is wash your hands, cover your cough and your sneeze, avoid touching your face, and really stay at home when you are sick. So remember, too, also, there's a sick and safe time law in Minneapolis protecting people that take time off for work. But one of the most important things I want to stress when we're dealing with this pandemic, and it's unprecedented in this nation's history, is that in our community, Minneapolis, the rate of infection of African Americans have went up 3% since last week. So we just got to make sure that it is affecting our community, and taking these measures are extremely important, Minneapolis. So I just want to give you a little update on the situation, but also, too, want to bring in my guest today, because the mayor, and I'll let her talk about this more, about the mayor's Gap Funding Initiative, is Tabitha Fischer. She's a business development specialist from CPED. She's going to answer a lot of those questions about what exactly does that mean for small business. Again, later in the show, we'll talk about the housing part of it. But today, Tabitha, I want to welcome you to Minneapolis 360. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Anthony.
You're welcome, and thanks for being here. Can you tell folks a little bit about what you do for CPED?
Sure. So I'm in the business development department, and I do proactive business outreach to businesses, and as well as helping entrepreneurs start new businesses, connecting them with resources, financing. I also do site search selection in particular. That's one of my specialties. But recently, I've been detailed to the small business team to help them field calls from small businesses, and part of that is getting the word out on this new program.
Perfect. So get into the meat of this program. We're talking about gap funding for small businesses. Tell us exactly what that means.
That's right. So Mayor Fry and the City Council have set aside $5 million to assist our Minneapolis residents and businesses. $3 million of that is dedicated to the gap funding for rental housing, which you're going to get into later in your program. And another $2 million is being set aside for these forgivable, no-interest loans for small businesses in designated areas. So if you check the city's website at minneapolismn.gov, coronavirus gap funding, you'll get a link to the application, and that'll have the most up-to-date information and the actual application right there.
Good. So if I'm a small business owner, my ears perked up significantly, right? Because
Absolutely.
what I heard, and what I heard, and I'm sure what our listeners heard, was that forgivable, no-interest loans. So when you say that, tell us how folks can access that application.
Okay, so follow that link on the city's website, and the applications are currently open. They just opened last Friday. It's not a first-come, first-serve. It's open until Monday, April 20th at noon. So get it in there. We expect more applications than funding is available. And so we're going to do a lottery of sorts at the end. But these loans are no interest. They're the eligibility for small businesses and self-employed workers that are impacted by the pandemic. So the loans are either for a $5,000 or $10,000 loan. The payments are deferred for 12 months, 1 year, and will be 100% forgivable if that business is still in operation at the end of the year and is in good regulatory standing. So the businesses can apply for this loan in addition to any federal SBA or state deed loans that are out there. And as I said before, there's going to be a lot of applicants that aren't going to get it, but at the end of this period, we're going to do a lottery, and we're going to give out as much money as we have available.
So just to be clear for folks in Minneapolis, Monday at noon, April 20th, applications close. So it is not a first come, first serve basis. So you don't have to necessarily rush to be the first one in. Is that right, Tabitha? You just have to make sure you get your application in by April 20th at noon, correct?
Correct. That is correct. And there's just a couple things you upload on that application. One is well, we'll get into that. That comes later in the question and answer. But just make sure you have your income for your business available, and then how many employees you have when you sit down to do the application. Okay.
So who's eligible, right? So I think that's the most important question here, because folks need to know, where am I located? Because there's locations around the city that are eligible for these funds. Can you tell us who's eligible?
Good question.
Yes, and that's key. So when you get to the application, there is a map, but the businesses that are located in the new cultural districts that are still going through the council process, the promise zones, the green zones, and then any areas of concentrated poverty are all eligible. So the application has a link that consolidates these 4 zones, and you can put in your address of your business or your home address if you're an independent contractor. And that'll tell you right there if you're eligible. So businesses must have 20 or fewer employees and or 1 million or less in annual revenue. So it's an and or there. So the applicant as a business must be in good regulatory standing with the city. Self-employed workers are eligible. One important note is immigration status does not impact your eligibility. Credit will not
definitely important.
And yes, it is. It's a rare, because a lot of the other programs, that is one of the requirements. So no immigration status is checked, no credit is checked, and no collateral is required. So there's a short list of businesses that are not eligible: nonprofits, gambling, adult entertainment, registered lobbying, multi-level marketing, billboards, and then those that are renting commercial or residential property.
And I think that's great information. Give folks the website where they can go to find out everything you just talked about too, Tabitha.
Sure. So you go to the city's website, minneapolismn.gov, and then it's under coronavirus and then gap funding. So there'll be, if you go to the coronavirus, you're going to have business and resident FAQs, and within that is the gap funding program. If you have any questions, you can call 311, and they'll either answer some basic questions or they'll direct you to the small business team, where we can direct you to a BTAP provider, business technical assistance, if you need a little more help. Or we can answer more detailed questions on the small business team as well.
Tabitha, I was going to ask, do you know if, say for instance, someone just started their business this year and they were actually making money just before the coronavirus, is it possible for them to still apply?
Yeah, absolutely, because what you're going to do on the application is indicate how much has this damaged your business. So if you were making, so much per month for 3 months, and all of a sudden it's gone, you're damaged.
Right.
So then you just have to detail, what is this damaging you? What are you missing out on? What kind of income?
Awesome.
So yeah, that's why there's the two amounts, because some might be a little less, but some might be more than 10,000, but they maxed it there. Mm-hmm.
And Kim, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's an extremely important question that sometimes gets missed, because this hit folks so fast, and I don't think the world didn't really understand what this was.
Right.
One of the things I want to go back to, too, that I thought you said was important, Tabitha, and we've been telling our listeners, this show has been on for about almost a year and a half, is that any questions that you have, 311 will be able to direct you to the right place to get that question answered. So I think you saying that was extremely important, but I just want to go back real quick too, because again, if I may be a new business owner, from what Kim talked about, and we read off some of the qualifications about who's eligible, and you say applicants need to be in good regulatory standing with the city. What exactly does that mean?
Good question.
Well, that refers mainly to your business license. So if you are a business that is licensed, not every business is, you have to meet certain requirements. You have to meet health codes, safety codes, those kinds of things. So it's rare. If you're out of compliance, you know it. You've had inspectors come and ask you to fix things or change things, and you haven't done it. Those kinds of things. That's the main thing with regulatory compliance. Other things could be property. It could be anything that we're referring to. The business owner knows about it. It's something that's been an issue because the way it works, they're cited first and given warnings before anything gets escalated. So with this short, like you said, this happened pretty quick. People will know if they're out of compliance.
Right.
And I just wanted to make sure to give no surprises to folks, right? So to be clear and concise about the information. And real quick before we go, Tabitha, so if I am the small business and I'm eligible for this loan and I get these funds, what can I use these funds for if I'm a small business owner?
Right. So this is one of the differences between our current programs where we mainly just fund physical equipment or physical property or a build out of a space. These funds can be used for any of your payroll, employee benefits, rent or mortgage payments, your accounts payable or payments due to your supply chain, or any other critical working capital needs. So this isn't just for anything that has, like I stated earlier, collateralized debt. This is for your day-to-day expenses that you're having a hard time paying right now. So that's why it's called the gap, because a lot of other programs take care of your other things, but this is a gap where people don't have a resource for this kind of funding.
So you're able to basically pay your bills, pay your employees, pay your suppliers, pay your rent, your mortgage on your buildings, all of those things, correct?
Anything to keep your business alive. We want you to survive and get through this.
And again, Minneapolis, this funding application ends April 20th at noon. Please get your applications in. If you have a small business and you're worried about your employees, your suppliers, all those things to help you manage through this time. Tabitha, real quick, and we are running up against the clock. You gave us a lot of really good information. Just give us something for small business owner. What's the biggest takeaway that you want to give folks today about this initiative?
Well, I hope people understand that we really care about our small businesses, and we really want you to get through this. We want to help you get through this. If you end up not being in one of those areas, because there are people, just across the street or down the block, and you still have critical needs, reach out to the small business team. We'll get you connected with other resources or other professionals who can help you find those. There's a lot out there, and it's really hard to digest, but we're in this with you. Hang in there. We want you to come back.
Excellent. We have Tabitha Fischer here today talking about the Small Business Gap Funding Initiative for the City of Minneapolis. Again, this is not a first come, first serve basis, Minneapolis. You just have to get your application in. Go to the website, minneapolis.gov/coronavirus/gap funding. To get more information on eligibility and questions as well. Also, too, and we've always promoted 311 on this show. If you have any questions, please call 311 because I think they can definitely be able to connect you to your needs. So, Tabitha, I want to thank you for being on Minneapolis 360 today.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yes.
And real quick, Minneapolis, and Kim, what's your thoughts about that?
Man, I think this is awesome. I'm glad that we're able to get this information out there because there's a lot of people who need it. There's a lot of people right now who are struggling to be able to just maintain, and they don't know what to do. So I'm so happy that Tabitha was able to come on today and share this information. And I'm ready for the next one. I just want to remind everybody to go ahead and follow KMOJ on Facebook at KMOJ Radio. And if you have questions for Chief Arradondo, make sure that you get them in now or as soon as possible as we move on to the next chapter.
Absolutely. So, and Kim, I'm glad you said that. And real quick, just to put a bow on that, I did want to make sure we talked about there's a housing gap funding initiative that is coming along too as well, Minneapolis. So with this program, it's going to be coming to details in the next couple of days, right? So really the amount of assistance will depend on individual needs and households and taking in consideration of households that are eligible. Again, in most cases, right, so we just talked about the small business gap funding. In some cases, assistance will not exceed $1,500 per household, but there is some flexibility around the housing gap funding to get $2,000 under extraordinary circumstances, right? So people are eligible are rent payments, right? If you are in the arrears, that money can definitely be applied to that as well. If you're 15 days due and or 15 days with utility payments are in the arrears, you're able to use that as well. But what's clear about this too, Minneapolis, so when the details come out about the housing gap funding money and the applications and that process, that'll come out, but these payments will not go directly to your pocket. So, right, so if you're eligible, you fill out your application for the housing gap funding initiative, those payments go to the landlord or it goes to the utility company. So I just want to make sure we're clear when more of those details come out about the housing gap funding initiative. So again, we will talk a lot about this on next week's show, so be prepared about that. I just want to give you some quick information to the website that you can again go to find out information and get more questions answered. Minneapolis.gov/coronavirus gap funding for updates. Again, we will take a small break. At 1 o'clock, we'll come back with Minneapolis Police Chief Arradondo, going to give you some information about enforcement, the stay-at-home order, and really whatever he's got to say. We're lucky to have Chief. I know he's been busy since this pandemic had hit our state, our city, our world. So we'll take a quick break. We'll come back with Chief Arradondo. Well, you know what,
Anthony, real quick, we do have a couple questions from Facebook. Someone asked, can they get $600 and unemployment? And is there a way to get food if they don't have any money?
If they have food and they don't have any money, I guess the question is, can they get the $600 from unemployment?
Well, can they get unemployment and $600? And yes, that was what I heard as well.
Yes, that is what the information I got too, correct? And with food, I guess with that money, with any type of small business loan, is that the small business initiative, Kim?
Yep, so they were asking about the unemployment and the small business assistance, and they asked, can they get $600 and unemployment? And I'm 99.9% sure that you can get the unemployment plus the additional $600, and that you don't have to do anything additional to get the $600 if you're already getting unemployment.
Yeah, and so what I would do too, Kim, and that's a great question, is to make sure we reply back with the websites so they can answer all that information, and 311, right?
Absolutely.
So having reached 311 is the best way to answer some of those questions if we don't have those answers.
311. You guys hear that? If you have any other questions, 311. But we will reply on Facebook, and I'll make sure to send links with that information as well so you can follow up. You ready to take this break and get Chief Arradondo on the line?
Take a quick break. Let's get the Chief on.
All right.
.9 KMOJ. KMOJ FM and KMOJ HD1, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Bringing unity to the community. 89.9 KMOJ, the People's Station.
Today's R&B and Throwbacks is 89.9 KMOJ. I'm Glam Life Kim, and I also have Anthony Taylor with Minneapolis 360 on the line. Anthony?
Kim, welcome back. Welcome back, Minneapolis. Before, on the first half hour of the show, we talked about the Small Business Gap Funding Initiative. On the second half of this show, I am glad and honored to have Minneapolis Police Chief Arradondo on Minneapolis 360 today. How are you doing today, Chief?
Mr. Taylor, my friend, I'm absolutely honored to be here in this space with you and Miss Glam Life, Kim. I'm doing well, and I hope that all of you and your loved ones are healthy and well.
All of my loved ones are healthy and well, a lot bored, going stir crazy, right? But we are all staying safe. And Chief, I assume that you've been extremely busy since all of this stuff happened. So I really want to just appreciate the time that you're taking today to help give us some information today, and especially around the stay-at-home order. So I want to thank you today.
No, it's really an important opportunity for me to make sure that our community gets this information is powerful. And so it's important for me to be able to have this space with you and Ms. Glam Life, Kim, to make sure that our community has the information they need for them and their loved ones to stay safe and healthy. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And let's get into it, because there's a lot of misinformation that's going around about exactly what the stay-at-home order means. And for you to come on and talk about that, what exactly for Minneapolis does the stay-at-home order mean for us?
So Governor Walz's executive order is really, first and foremost, it's really trying to prevent and reduce the spread of the coronavirus, or COVID-19, as we talk about. So one of the key tools for that is social distancing. And so many of you and your listeners may have heard about, what is social distancing, how does that help me, and what does it impact, and how does it impact my day-to-day life? And so it's really about trying to limit large gatherings, our community members being in spaces where there's so many people, there's not enough room to move around freely, and we're really talking about that 6-foot distance or space between us, if we can do it. Now, we clearly know that many of us live with family members, and we have to go to and from places with other people. But it's really trying to ensure that we do all we can to really limit the social distancing as much as we can.
And I think that's very important. I don't know if you were listening earlier, Chief, but there's been a 3% increase in positive tests for African Americans just in a week in our city. So. And from what all health experts say is social distancing is the most important part to be able to get through this pandemic.
Yes, so one of the things that our public health officials, and clearly it's not going to be news to many of us here in the African American community, is that not all things are equal. And so sadly and unfortunately, for many decades, African Americans have not always had access to the best in terms of health care, the best in terms of nutritional, or access to good nutrition and other things. And so as a result of that, we have taken on certain physical ailments, diabetes and heart disease and other things, respiratory illnesses that, quite frankly, many in the other demographics have not had to endure and deal with. And so coronavirus is even more, can be more impactful and even more fatal for African Americans. So we, as a community, must really make sure that we're taking the governor's stay-at-home executive order and listening to our public health officials. We have to really be serious about that. And I also want to just emphasize, too, that the coronavirus, it doesn't discriminate. It young, old, doesn't care what your income status is. But many of our young people, our youth, feel that they're not vulnerable to it, and that is not the case. And so we really want to take and heed the message of our public health officials as it relates to social distancing. It can be a preventative tool to keeping our loved ones safe.
We are with Minneapolis Police Chief Arradondo, talking today on Minneapolis 360 about the stay-at-home order. Chief Arradondo, will the police be enforcing these stay-at-home orders?
So one of the things that we are really trying to focus on as the Minneapolis Police Department is getting voluntary compliance. And so what that simply means is we are really trying to take Governor Walz's executive order and certainly Mayor Fry's emergency declaration and educate and make our people aware of what it is. It is not our main focus or our goal to issue citations or even arrest people. That is not what our goal is as Minneapolis Police Department. It's really a public health crisis and not so much a public safety crisis. So we are really going out there trying to educate, make our communities aware of how important it is to practice social distancing. So whether it's large groups gathering at a backyard party, or even this message goes to our faith leaders, it goes to our churches, it goes to our for weddings and funerals. We are really trying to make sure that in all aspects of our life, because this is a new normal for everyone, we want to make sure that we're doing all we can to really make sure that we're limiting these large social gathering spaces.
Chief Arradondo, one of our listeners asked, why aren't the police wearing masks on the north side?
Well, if you could see me now, I actually have a cloth mask on.
Oh,
But obviously your listeners can't see me. But
right.
Just the other day, I put out a directive to ensure that our officers wear their cloth mask or surgical mask, and at times they may have to wear the N95 face mask. And so there may be situations where they may not have it on at the time, but I'm really strongly making sure that our officers are utilizing the mask protection. And so if they may have saw that officer, I don't know what day they saw them, but they will probably, matter of fact, they won't probably, they will see many more of our officers, them being in contact with them, wearing face masks.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's important because if we as a city are telling folks social distancing, use protective gear, I think it's great to see our Minneapolis police officers doing the same thing. I want to just circle back real quick to something that you said too, Chief Arradondo, and it's more about the enforcement, and you emphasize that the idea is to educate, not enforce, not to arrest people, because just talk a little bit more about that. So I think, because I say that because when you hear stay-at-home orders and then you hear about enforcement, those are words that could be triggers, right, to our people in our community. But really the goal is to educate, not to arrest folks.
Yeah, no, that's Mr. Taylor. You bring up a very good point. So this is something that is really for all of us who have lived over the last even 100 years. The Spanish flu was the last time back in 1917 that we experienced this in our country. But for many of us, this is the first time that we've ever experienced a pandemic. And so it's widespread sweeping, it's widespread, it's throughout our country, but this is a public health crisis first and foremost. It's not a public safety issue. It's not an enforcement issue at this point. So education and making people aware is very critical. There's nothing on our Minneapolis police in terms of our policies or procedures or law books about coronavirus. That just doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And so we have to approach this as a public health matter. And so that's why the education piece is so important. I do not want to compound a public health crisis and make it into an enforcement matter. So that's why, first and foremost, I want to make sure that our officers are out there educating our community on the importance of social distancing, educating them on the importance of the governor's order, and that together we can get through this. But keep in mind, if people disregard the importance of this pandemic and figure, well, as long as I'm healthy, I don't care if I spread it to someone else, we should not be doing that. And if that is the case, and we see violations, blatant violations, after educating people on the governor's order, then I want to do all I can to keep our community safe, and officers may have to take an enforcement action. That has not occurred yet, and I think that is a sign that our community at large is taking this very seriously.
Well, I was just going to say, one of our listeners had asked, how can they turn someone in for not social distancing? And so I just wanted you to kind of recap again that is it not about the arrest or actually turning someone in, but you do want them to make you guys aware? Or what's your thoughts on that, Chief?
Yeah, Ms. Glamlight, that's a great question. And so One of the things we're asking, if community members are, again, if Mr. Taylor is having 6 people over at his home for a gathering, that's very different than if he's got 100 people in close quarters at his gathering. If community members should experience or see a gathering of 100 people that seems to be in violation of the governor's order, they can call 311 or 612-673-3000. And that information can get relayed. And then again, if we end up having to send officers out there, again, it's first and foremost to educate the homeowner or the folks that are having and organizing the event, and to really let them know that your guests are really susceptible to possibly coming into the coronavirus and having that happen. And we don't want that. So it's going to be education and awareness first.
Awesome.
And thank you for reiterating that, Chief. And I just think that's important. So, you're saying that folks, if the Minneapolis police see large gatherings, they'll come over and they'll educate, right? Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily enforcement, but compliance, I think, is important. So if there's some non-compliance things, then there's another level that what you're saying, Chief. So I just want to make sure that folks understand that in our community.
Yeah, and Mr. Taylor, you had just mentioned previously, I want to go back to the very important statistic you had mentioned, that if we know that the African-American community has a higher rate or risk of coming into contracting the coronavirus, then we also as a community should be just even more empathetic to make sure that we are doing all we can so that our community is not getting infected by that. So I'm really hopeful that our community, and I know our community, we love one another. We are looking after each other. We're looking after our elders and our young people, and we want to make sure that we stay healthy because we will get through this. But again, we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to prevent that.
So another issue, too, Chief, that I want to just talk about real quickly is people talk about emergency permits or waivers you should have in hand in case you're asked, what are you doing out, or why are you not following the stay-at-home orders? And I know there's a lot of misinformation that happens, and unfortunately social media can be a gift and a curse. So just some of the misinformation, does a permit or a waiver even exist in the city?
No. So, I'm so glad, Mr. Taylor, you brought that up. So let me just dispel that rumor. The Minneapolis Police Department, we are not conducting roadblocks or road closures or demanding people have certain papers that say coronavirus, I have to travel here or there, that we're not asking for certain papers or special IDs. That is not the case. Through this governor's executive order, everyone, community members are allowed to drive leisurely for travel. They're allowed to go to and from work. They're allowed to go to the grocery store, visit loved ones. We do not have any order or anything in place that requires anyone to have some sort of special identification.
I have a quick question. One of the kids asked me the other day when they saw that Tavares Jackson passed away, and they said, will he be able to have a funeral? How are you guys, are you allowing, groups, but as long as there's so many people per feet in the building, or is there a rule against that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So one of the things the governor's executive order talks about as it relates specifically to such things as funeral services, they really want funeral services to still be mindful of the social distancing. And so we have seen funeral services where they're taking into account the number of people who will be allowed to attend those. Some, just like our churches, have gone virtual or online. And so, again, while it's a very different world that we're living into today, we are seeing people try to be creative in terms of how they can still conduct those services, but also try to keep members safe. This past Easter weekend, there were several churches, even including a couple here on the North Minneapolis area, that did drive-in type of services where folks were asked to stay in vehicles, but they still had speaker systems and were able to get their faith word to them that way. So everyone is really working very differently, being very innovative in terms of how they can still conduct those services, but also keep their members safe and healthy.
Right.
And to piggyback that off that too, Chief, I mean, this was a hard Sunday for a lot of our community members, right? Because there was no Easter Sunday service. And I think, and I've heard a few of those stories as well, how folks are being creative about the way with our faith leaders and our faith system that are really coming up with some innovative ways to be able to still touch folks and folks to be able to still have a spiritual connection with their churches.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and we're going to have to continue to do that. At least all the information that we seem to be receiving here as a state, that we're going to be at this for at least a while, and so we're going to have to continue to make sure that we're taking care of our communities, taking care of our faith congregants and others, but we're going to have to continue to be creative in how we do that.
Right.
We are here with Minneapolis Police Chief Arradondo. I know you are a busy person, Chief, so I just want to make sure that I respect your time. Kim, is there one more question from the community that we could ask Chief Arradondo before our time is up here?
There is one. Someone just asked, can I visit my son in jail?
That's a great question. So one of the things I know that Sheriff Hutchinson over at Hennepin County Sheriff's Office in the jail has done is they are also making sure that those folks who are there in the jail are keeping healthy and safe, but he also has to ensure that his staff, his sworn and civilian staff over at the jail stay healthy and safe. So the last that I had heard is that they did have some restrictions in place regarding visitation, and so for that caller, I would suggest that she call Hennepin County Jail Administration and see what their current status is in allowing visitors. But they are taking it just as serious as well, and that's where the health and welfare of those who are currently in the jail and certainly for his workers.
Thank you, Chief. And just real quick, can you give folks the number again that you gave folks if there's gatherings that are 50 or 100? Who can they call again? We know it's 311 as always. What's that number again, Chief?
Yes, Mr. Taylor, it's 612, area code 612-673-3000.
And I just want Minneapolis to understand that the Chief's talking about large gatherings. We don't want to, call this number on folks who are practicing social distancing, and we're talking about 3 or 4 people. So I just want to be clear, Minneapolis, and just reiterate some of the things that Chief said. Chief, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to have one more question for you, and it's this. What's the biggest takeaway during our conversation that you want to leave Minneapolis residents about what we're facing in this time, this pandemic that's affecting our city, especially in our African-American community? All the great information that you gave folks today about enforcement. What's the biggest takeaway that you want to leave folks with today?
I would just say resiliency and compassion. Throughout this, when we kind of learned about the coronavirus here in our city, I have seen more resiliency of our communities coming together, showing compassion for their neighbors, helping their seniors out, getting to the grocery store for them, checking on their loved ones, being creative, making sure our young people still have activities to do to keep them active and learning. And so it's going to be that same resiliency and compassion that I am absolutely positive that will drive us in getting through this, because we will get through this. And so I think if we hang in there and continue to spread that compassion and be resilient, we're going to see this through.
Mm-hmm.
Chief Arradondo, Minneapolis Police Chief, thank you, my friend, for being a part of this show today. I hope that you could come on again and talk about maybe some good news later on, and we've defeated this pandemic.
Absolutely. Mr. Taylor, I want to thank you again. I know that you've been such a strong leader in our community for so long. Ms. Glam Life Kim, thank you as well. And if you get an opportunity during your next musical break, why don't you put on some Frankie Beverly Mays Happy Feelings for me, okay?
I got you. I got you.
All right. The Chief with a request. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks,
Chief.
Chief.
Have a great day.
All righty.
That was Chief Arradondo, Minneapolis Police Chief, talking about enforcement left you with a request with some Frankie Beverly. Remind me something that my pops would tell me to play.
I got it ready for him too.
Yeah. So, but real quick, Kim, before we do that, what's your thoughts on the conversation with the chief? What's your impressions on some of the things that he talked about today?
You know, I'm a fan of Chief Arradondo. I think he's doing a great job, and I don't feel, like you said, as far as enforcement, they're not trying to arrest anyone. So I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, it's going to be the end of the world. However, this is serious. So I guess the takeaway is we just want everybody to know to be safe, to do the best that you can, to follow the rules that they have put in place, because it's only to help us. It's not to harm us, It's not to harm. And I've been a fan of Arradondo for a long time, and I'm glad he came on here to talk about this topic, because you're 100% right. I mean, we are in unprecedented times, right? So I say this because there's a lot of misinformation out there that people will arrest you if you got to drive to the store, you have to do this, or you sitting on your porch because there's a stay-at-home order. But coming from him, I hope it resonates a lot in our community, because what's happening is folks are just trying to educate. So Minneapolis police are trying to educate to make sure that we are not passing the virus around, because ultimately we all want to get back to our normal routine. Absolutely.
So I think that's just important, and I'm glad he was able to talk to our community and our listeners. So again, folks who posted questions on KMOJ's Facebook page, we appreciate that. We make sure that we can try to get Chief Arradondo back. But Kim, you got his request queued up?
I do. I have his song, May's Happy Feelings. So let's make it. You know what? I think that's a great song for everybody for today. And I mean, especially because it has, sometimes, you get a little cooped up being in the house all the time. So let's not bring some happy feelings to the Twin Cities.
Absolutely. So this is what we're going to do in Minneapolis. I'm going to give you just a little bit more information. We're going to roll out with Chief's requests. I just want to thank all our guests today. Tabitha Fischer coming on talking about small business, the housing, or the small business gap funding. I gave you a little bit of information on the housing gap funding that is to come. All of this information can be shared and can be received at minneapolis.gov/coronavirus. It's updated frequently. And remember, things change on a daily basis. It has links to the Minnesota Department of Health, the CDC website. There's also translated information. You can always call the Department of Health hotline at 651-201-3920 or toll free at 1-800-657-3903. And I think that's important to remember, small business owners, you have until April 20th at noon to get those applications out. So folks
5 days.
It's 5 days, and again, it's about getting your application in, not a first come, first served basis. So if you just heard this information, it is not queued up to where this person is number 500 because you called at that time. It's about getting your application in. Go to the website to make sure where you are eligible. One of the most important things, again, is just being in good standing with the city, and also being able to pay your bills, your employees, your suppliers. I think that's important. Just a heads up, next week's show will be talking about the housing gap funding initiatives and the details in that. So you want to tune into that as well. We'll be back at our regular time at 1 o'clock next Wednesday. So I just want to make sure that folks understand where they can get this information. You can always email me at anthony.taylor@minneapolismn.gov. Also, too, make sure you can always call 311 inside and outside of the city if you need assistance. So, Glam Life, it was a pleasure as always. I wish I could see you in person.
I know. I'm sending hugs through the phone. I'm sending hugs out to everybody. Anybody who needed a hug today, you got one from me and Anthony. I'm sure he doesn't mind that, right, Anthony?
I always need a hug.
See?
Minneapolis, we will see you next week at 1 o'clock. This is Minneapolis 360. I'm Anthony Taylor. Be safe, everybody.
All right. On the way, we've got Maze with Happy Feelings, and Zany K is up next. It's 89.9 KMOJ. Today's R&B and Throwbacks. I'm Glam Life Kim. One love, kings and queens.